So it seems like everybody wants to be playing around Zeri Reroll these days. Zeri Reroll went from a comp that wasn't particularly popular or wasn't a very high cap comp to now being one of the most popular comps with many different win conditions. And this video I'm going to go over the Zeri Reroll comp. I'm going to tell you guys how to play it and some of the best items for the units, and then we're going to go into a little bit of a deep dive and why this whole thing occurred. Now, before I go any further, make sure that you like and subscribe if you do like my content. I'm at 5,000 subs, so I'm going to be opening my merch/art store that's going to be very soon. I'm just waiting to get back to some emails with some like other background stuff that I have to do to update the website. At 10,000 subs, we're going to have our RP giveaway. So if you watch my videos and they help you at all, or if you just want to support the channel, please make sure to like, subscribe, and put on the notification bell because it does help me as a small creator. Now, the reason I wanted to make this video was that I was watching Tactician's Trial on the weekend, and there was a lot of reactions like this every time there was a Zeri augment or Zeri unit. You can see this player right here, aerial warfare, 2 other augment choices.
So I mean, whatever.
No worries.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm definitely a Zeri believer.
Just instant click, doesn't even roll the other augments. Obviously it's Warwick's Hunger in this game. This is from Froden's VOD, by the way. This is from the American Tactician's Trial that happened on the weekend. I was watching it because I was taking a little bit of time off on the weekend and working on some stuff in the background. But this is Froden's VODs. I'm not going to watch the whole video just because out of respect I didn't get like proper permission to use the footage. I just want to point out that there's a lot of games, almost every game on the weekend there was a Zeri Reroll player, and that's at the highest level of TFT because these are actual tournaments. It's not just like ladder. These are people that are playing for tournaments to make money and stuff like that. I'm sure you also see it a lot in your gameplay. Zeri Reroll is not something that's new. This is a video I made a month ago. This was me just reviewing myself playing a Zeri game and why I enjoy playing Watchers and Zeri instead of Kog'Maw, because Kog'Maw was one of the more popular lines back then, all the way at the beginning of December. This is a comp that did exist for a while, but in recent history, it's being played much more. If you look at it right now, this is patch 15.1. So this is the patch that came out last week. So within a week, there was 75k games played of Zeri 3 Scar 3. If we go back to the previous patch, which was an entire month basically, like 14.24 was like the entirety of December, it's pretty much the exact amount of games played. Within 1 week, there is an equivalent, or maybe a little bit over a week, but there's an equivalent amount of games played of Zeri Reroll as there were in the last couple of days. And if you look at it, if we go to the previous patch, for example, you'll see the average placement and the average like top 4 rate and win rate, they're pretty similar. There's not that much of a difference because the thing is, Zeri was already strong. So when Zeri got a buff in the most recent patch from 48 to 51, a lot of us had already seen Zeri played, and if you've played Zeri in your own game, you'll probably notice it too. It's like, oh yeah, I already play around Zeri, and now Zeri is getting a buff. It's not a popular comp by any means, because before, Zeri was just a very consistent comp, and that's the thing. Whenever a consistent comp gets a buff, a lot of times it becomes very popular, because everybody wants to have a consistent comp that has good average placement. That's just the way TFT is. If you can get a consistent comp every single game, you would probably pick the consistent option to just constantly gain LP. So before, when you would play Zeri, you would always play it with Watchers, and this is similar to how it is played now, except there's a couple more nuanced aspects of it, just because of how you're not, like, now people are starting to optimize and play so much more of Zeri that we're starting to see like what items and what situations are better for this particular comp. So typically when you're playing Zeri Reroll, if you read Zeri's ability, the way that she works, she doesn't have mana, right? It says 0 out of 3. That doesn't mean 0 out of 3 mana. She doesn't generate mana like a normal unit. She basically just gets this counter to go up every time she auto attacks. So she has a passive ability instead of an active ability because she doesn't actually cast. And every third attack is replaced with a spark that deals physical damage to the target and physical damage to 2 nearby enemies. So if you want to see exactly how it works, I actually have a later video or later portion of this video. Like I said, I'm only going to show snippets of these VODs because I don't want to actually, I didn't get permission from Frodan to use these videos. So by all means, please make sure to like and subscribe to Frodan. I subscribed on the other one. I'll subscribe again just to make sure. Just different accounts and stuff. But the idea is that Zeri, as you can see, there's like these lightning effects that come from her, and she zaps additional enemies. So she has like this melting effect. Usually what you want to do with Zeri is just want to build her in such a way that you give her attack speed, similar to how you would play around a Kog'Maw, and then she will slowly melt through multiple enemies. The reason that this comp works really well is because you have a very stable front line. Since the beginning of the since the beginning of the set, Watchers has been one of the go-to frontline traits that is very strong. The problem with Watch is that if you're playing around 6 Watcher, it's a little bit awkward because Garen's pretty contested and a lot of the other units are low cost units. They don't have good synergies to make a very strong backline a lot of the time. So typically Watcher has been a very strong trait, but it's typically locked more towards reroll lines. Before Zeri was really popular, the main go-to comp was Kog'Maw. A lot of times you would play Kog'Maw with 4 Watchers, and the idea is that if you have a backline unit that wants to auto-attack, you can put a Gwinsu on them. The Gwinsu, every time they attack, they slowly gain stacking attack speed. With that stacking attack speed, they eventually get to a point where it's like, they're just melting units because they're attacking so many times that they're continuing to proc their abilities and proc damage. So the idea is that you make an impenetrable front line, play deep into a vertical trait like Watchers here, and then with this vertical trait, you then play around a backline unit that scales in some way. You either want to scale them with a Gwinsu, or you want to scale them with an Archangel if they're an AP caster. That's why early on in the set, you always saw Kog'Maw reroll being a thing. They did nerf Kog'Maw a lot, and it became very unpopular. But now what's happening is because of Zeri buffs, and general buffs to and changes in the way the game is working, more people are likening a similar style of comp to playing Zeri reroll here. Now, what does Zeri want to do? Because she attacks every 3rd cast, doing extra spark damage, you want her to auto attack as much as possible. A Gwinsu is really good. Even 2 Gwinsus is really good. A lot of times just having a bunch of attack speed on the Zeri is going to be the best go-to option for her. Typically what you'll see, the main build that people do with Zeri is that you go Gwinsu, then you go Gunblade, and then you go +1, which is either which is some sort of damage item. Now, because she has Sniper built in, she gets damage amp because of the Sniper trait. If you read the Sniper trait, you basically get extra damage if targets are further away. Because of that, a lot of times you'll see people put IE on her, and this is considered quote-unquote Zeri Bis. Now, what I'm here to say is that you don't have to worry too much about this. As long as, a lot of times, as long as you have a Gwinsu and a Gunblade, you're in a pretty good spot around the Zeri. Gunblade's really good because at one point the Zeri is doing so much damage because she ramps up the Gwinsu that the Gunblade helps to heal your front line. If you read Gunblade, it heals the lowest percent ally for 25% of the damage dealt. So if your Zeri is at a point where she's doing an infinite amount of damage, she can then sustain the front line. And the idea is that you just want the front line to live as long as possible because it allows her to stack up the Gwinsu. This comp used to be a go-to consistent comp for this reason, because you're playing such a strong front line that you don't have to worry too much about mid-game fights. You're very strong in your mid-game because you're playing reroll, right? Like if you're on stage 3, for example, a lot of times you just get a 4 Watcher, 2 Sniper level 6 board that looks similar to this, and you usually roll to upgrade to Zeri 2, Scar 2, and at that point, you're in a pretty good spot. Now, with this comp, a lot of times people look at the Scar and they look at the Kog'Maw and they used to roll on level 7. I'm here to say that you shouldn't usually roll on level 7. A lot of times, your front line is really stable with a Scar 2 and 6 Watcher. As long as you're at 6 Watcher, your front line usually is okay and you can still get like a top 4. What's really devastating is when you don't have a Zeri 3. I would rather have a Scar 2 and a Zeri. Well, maybe this isn't true all the time, but it really depends on what the other people are doing in your lobby. Sometimes a Zeri 3 with 6 Watcher is a lot better than a Zeri 2 and a Scar 3 and 6 Watcher, just because you don't have enough damage on the Zeri a lot of the time. Now, that's like a personal preference type of thing. I wouldn't recommend going strictly for the Scar. What I usually recommend when I see this comp is that you roll on stage 3 and you roll on level 6 odds. The reason you want to roll on level 6 odds is because this comp is very tempo based. You want to make sure that you are preserving HP as much as possible, because at one point you are just relying on one unit for the most part to do most of your damage. Because of that, late game you fall off really hard if you don't cap out your board very high. There are ways to cap out the board, but it is difficult if you're playing reroll to cap out your board high later in the game. So if you roll on level 6, you can go for Zeri 3, and as you can still hit Scar 3 on level 6, that's not an issue. But a lot of times you can also go for Vander 3-star and Vladimir 3-star, because with 6 Watcher, these two units are basically unkillable as well. So you have a lot to roll for on level 6, as opposed to level 7, you don't really care too much about Kog'Maw 3 because all your items are going to be built around Zeri, and you don't care too much about, you do care a lot about Scar 3, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Scar 3 isn't good. It is part of the win condition for the comp. But what I would say is that a lot of times, if you don't have the Zeri 3, you might never see Zeri 3 if you go level 7. You want to use that gold on level 6 a lot of the time to make sure your board is stable. So this is a board, if you count the amount of units though, it's 8 units. What you do in the intermediate a lot of the times is that you play Echo. Echo is a great use of extra items, and Firelight is very strong now because of it. You can play 3 Firelight. Firelight basically makes it so that every 6 seconds you dash, and when they dash, they heal. So healing your Scar and healing your Echo gives you a lot of frontline. It also makes it so that Zeri isn't in a spot where she's just going to die randomly. Making sure that if you have one backline carry, that they have some sort of sustain or durability or tankiness to them. It's very important, because if you get sniped or if you get killed by something and the Zeri dies, this board falls apart very fast. You're basically entirely dependent on the Zeri doing all of the damage. Firelight works really well for this reason, because you can't get cheesed very easily. The Zeri's going to heal, and she's going to take less damage because of that. Because of that less damage, you're in a good spot usually. So usually what you want to do is you want to hold on to an Echo. On level 6, you basically play 4 Watcher with the Zeri. And then on level 7, you basically can play Echo. And then on level 8, you can play 6 Watcher. So you basically can toggle in this Echo to get some extra Firelight tankiness, or like quote-unquote tankiness. And it also helps with your Scar and your other units. Now, I don't think this comp is completely unconditional, but if you play the comp and you have a spot for it, like you start the game off with a Zeri, you're pretty much almost guaranteed like a good placement. It's going to be very hard for you to go 8th because the comp is so stable in your mid game because of its general like power level that it has. If you want to look for items for your front line, because they're Watchers, you just want to avoid durability. Watchers gain a bunch of durability, so it doesn't make sense for you to make like a Steadfast. A lot of times on Scar, I like to just put Giga Tank items. So a lot of times I'll put something like, as many like really big armor MR items as I can. Or I'll put something like HP. A lot of times I like to put Sunfire on Scar. Because Scar takes so long to die and he's going to be so tanky, he's usually the unit that you want to itemize almost always. Unless you're like in a spot where you have Vander 3, Vladimir 3, then you might want to itemize Vander in some cases. But that's usually in dire straits. A lot of times you go for Zeri, you go for Vander, like one of the two, and then you level to 7 and then you go for Scar 3. But Sunfire works really well because if the Scar is living forever, he just keeps applying the burn to all of the units, and that continues to tick down damage. Additionally, there's many win cons with this comp, which I can talk about with augments, right? There's many of the augments are very good with Zeri. Something like Pyromania. Pyromaniac I love with Zeri, because Zeri applies the burn to everybody when she does her zap damage. So the burns have increased damage. An old build, this used to be like an indicator that you can play Zeri in previous patches. So now that Zeri got buffed, it's even better. Other options are pumping up, for example. Just gaining a bunch of attack speed helps your entire board. But the real win conditions are things like Firelight. Right, hitting a Firelight +1 absolutely juices the entire board. Right, so Firelight Crown, for example. Firelight Crown gives you a Firelight Emblem and a Scar, but the main thing is the Firelight Emblem allows you to play towards 4 Firelight, right? If you can make it to a board where you can play 4 Firelight, you can just Firelight one of the frontline units. Now they heal every time they dash, or if you have another backline unit, you can heal based on the other backline unit that you have. It's extremely strong, and it gives you a lot of extra tankiness in the front line, because if you give it to somebody like a Garen or even one of your 3-star other tanks, if you manage to hit them, you get a lot of extra power. Additionally, 4 Firelight gives you a massive burst of attack speed. So this attack speed works really well for the Zeri to basically cap out her Gwinsu a lot faster and do significantly more damage. Additionally, this is the other win condition that everybody seems to go for. If you ever see it, you always take it. What it is anger issues. Now, anger issues in the most recent patch also got a buff, right? The AD and AP per stack went from 1 to 1.5. This is a massive buff to anger issues, to a point where a lot of people are experimenting and trying to play it in different ways. Now, it works really well with Zeri because we already talked about how much Zeri just wants to auto attack and just like ramp up a Gwinsu because of the way that she applies the extra static effect that she has. This is basically a 50% damage increase. So if you give it to some units that really like to auto attack a lot, it's insane. Now, the problem with anger issues typically is that you can't make anti-heal and you can't make shred or sundering. So a lot of times you need a unit that basically has so much overwhelming damage, or a board that has so much overwhelming tankiness that you can bypass that by just having the anger issue stack. So typically it's really bad. A lot of times you can take anger issues and you can try. I've seen people try it with family reroll, and it's like okay sometimes, but often it's pretty bad. I've seen people try it with Twitch a lot because Twitch is an auto attacker. That's also really bad because I feel like it just doesn't work as intended. Like the compensation you get for the amount of damage that you get from the prismatic doesn't outweigh the fact that you can't make proper tank items, proper damage items, or shred and sunder, or anti-heal. Like, losing those aspects doesn't warrant the prismatic power level that it gives you. But it does, however, work really well for Zeri. It's almost a guaranteed win condition. The thing that makes it so broken on Zeri is not only does Zeri get triple Gwinsu, which allows her to stack a lot faster, she now gains AD off of all of them. Because she's a sniper, she has damage amp because of her sniper trait. So you get damage amp with a bunch of AD. She has really good use of the AD, and she has really good use of the attack speed because it allows her to just continually zap her targets. Zapping the targets is insane because not only does it do a bunch of damage to like frontline units, as units start to die on the opponent's board, the zaps always hit 2 nearby enemies. So those 2 nearby enemies eventually become backline units. She'll zap the front line, but when the front line, the auxiliary units die and the main tank is still alive, you start absolutely melting the back line. And the more auto attacks you do, the better it works. Additionally, if you're playing around Scar himself also auto attacks a bunch, right? Firelight itself gives you some like, you know, they get the dash, but additionally, if you get to 4 Firelight, they also get the attack speed. Even without the attack speed, Scar himself, in terms of a tank, he does hit a bunch. He does a lot of auto attacks, right? There's some tanks that don't do anything, like they just stand there and they just absorb damage. Something like Vander, for example, he auto attacks, but then at one point he just stops attacking, he just sits there and does nothing. Scar is almost always attacking, so it helps him to get a bunch of these Gwinsu stacks up, because basically each of the Gwinsus gives him a bunch of armor and MR, and as a Watcher unit, he already has a bunch of durability. So you get armor, MR, and then these give a bunch of durability, and then they also give AD and AP. This Scar also does like a significant amount of damage as well with triple Gwinsu if you have anger issues, just by the trait of by the way the augment works, excuse me. So the augment's really good. The units are really good. This is basically a win con. A lot of times if you see anger issues, I wouldn't say that you force towards Zeri, but it's often the thing of, oh, that's the tech, I just play Zeri now. If you have a Zeri and you see anger issues, you instantly click it. There is no other, it's the best prismatic for the augment, guaranteed, even better than Firelight. You just click anger issues, you win the game. Maybe not win, but it's gonna be damn close to a win, basically. So that's basically the whole Zeri comp. If you want to cap out this board, obviously on level 9, you always go towards the 3 Firelight. Kog'Maw, if you're not going for Kog'Maw 3, you could go for Kog'Maw 3 as well. It will always be middling damage compared to the Zeri. Now Kog'Maw, the way that they reworked Kog'Maw, you usually want to play Kog'Maw with Automata in order to actually realize the full effects. And then it doesn't work really well with Zeri, because Zeri you care more about having the 6 Watcher frontline. So Kog'Maw doesn't work that well, but what you could do is you can always cap out around a Caitlyn. Caitlyn does an insane amount of damage. Zeri is very good at scaling and doing auto attack damage. Caitlyn's good at doing burst damage. So it's a really good complement to have a front line that's really impenetrable. Zeri just ramps up, and then Caitlyn finishes everybody off because she does this huge amount of burst damage by casting a bunch. She also works really well because you want to put mana items on her. Basically, Zeri, you never want to put a mana item on her because she literally can't have a mana item on her. If you try and put a mana item on her, it bounces off. It's impossible to put mana items on her. So a lot of times, like your AP items and or your non-regular items that you would make for Zeri items. So I'll just put Zeri items here like this, right? Like non-AD items are usually either going to be tank items or AP items that you can put on the Scar. And then if you have additional items that you have, like if you want to make a dual AD carry, typically you just cap out around Caitlyn, and then you could put like massive damage on Caitlyn instead. In terms of Zeri's best items, a lot of people debate whether or not it should be like Gwinsu Gunblade damage or if it should be Gwinsu Gunblade. I would say that I prefer just having 1 Gwinsu. I like having 2 Gwinsus on Zeri, but I think that it's just really bad for the item economy. If anything, I like to have something like this. If I have a lot of bows, I'd rather just make Gwinsu Red Buff Gunblade. That's a me preference, of course. I think the best option that's like all around going to be good and it isn't super situational is that you go Gwinsu Gunblade and then a damage item. So if you look at the prioritization of items as well, you usually want a lot of bows because Zeri's obviously good with bows. But you can use an what's really weird about this comp is it's kind of like an AD comp, but you can use an infinite amount of what's it called? Rods, right? If you look at Gwinsu Gunblade, That's rod, right? This Zeri, just to make her basic items, you typically want 2 rods, which is already massive. The thing that's really good here is that having a backline unit that requires a bunch of rods, it makes it so your item economy is often really good, because it's like, I don't know how to describe it really well, but a lot of times when you're playing AD and you get dropped rods, you're like, now what do I do? Because Zeri has good use in making the Gunblade and the Guinsoo, you don't have to worry about getting dropped too many rods, because if you get dropped tank items, right, like anything that's a tank item, you just put it on the Scar. So all of these components are basically Scar items. Tier components, you can combine with these to make good Scar items, right? Because Scar, he has really good AP scaling, so giving him like an adaptive helm or a crown guard, like a adaptive helm, protector's vow, crown guard, all of the AP focused frontline items, I'm trying to find crown guard, are all really good on Scar as well. So you have good item economy that way if you get a bunch of AP items. If you get a bunch of AD items, then you can just make like IE, Last Whisper. You can swap out some of these items in your mid and early game, and then you can eventually just switch them later. I would stress the importance of Guinsoo Gunblade. If you have Guinsoo Gunblade, you should always make that. But Zeri's quite flexible, right? The Gunblade helps in your overall tankiness. If you lose the Gunblade, it's not the end of the world, though. Is what I would tell people. I wouldn't say like Gunblade is like absolutely necessary. It just helps with the whole synergy of the board. But if you get a bunch of AD items, like you get a bunch of swords, you can just make death blades. It's fine. Zeri, like, it's not as good probably as a Infinity Edge for the reasons I was stating before, but it's still a bunch of AD to help out the Zeri unit. It's fine. So your item economy is really good. A lot of times with this comp, it's very hard to miss really badly on items unless you're playing Zeri and you have 0 bows, 0 anything. Like if you start this comp and you have none of the items required to play Zeri, then obviously, yeah, don't play Zeri. But what I'm saying is a lot of times it's very easy for your items to work out in such a good way because you have this synergy where you're playing AD backline, AP frontline tank, and then late game you also have other units that can use other items really effectively. But that's the Zeri comp. If you want to see like an old video, this was an old video where I played, right? As you can see, I talk about it a lot of why I like Zeri in this video, but this was a month ago. This was outdated, but it just goes to show you like, this is what happens with TFT a lot of the time. You'll be playing a comp, you'll think to yourself, okay, this comp is pretty good, right? And then it will get buffed. Now, I'm not saying it didn't need to get buffed. Obviously, like it wasn't that popular. It was more of a niche pick. But as you can see in this video, I'm playing this like a month ago, and it's the exact same thing. I don't have a Gunblade because I didn't get a Gunblade, but look, I put all my AP items on the front line. I put my Last Whisper, what's it called? Infinity Edge on my Zeri, and I went first this game, I'm pretty sure, when I VOD reviewed it. Like this was back a month ago. So when Zeri got buffed, the first thing I said to myself is, yeah, I'm pretty sure we're going to see a lot more Zeri. And then I watch on the weekend, and everybody's playing Zeri. Every single lobby, I think there's a Zeri player if you go through this VOD. But like sometimes there's people that got Firelight emblems, but people are much more open to the idea of it. And that's what you should always look for, right? Whenever you look at patch notes and stuff like that, you should always look for comps and situations that are already good. And if they get small buffs, right? Because like, you know, for example, Echo was on the verge of being good. A lot of people don't think Echo was trash because nobody plays Echo. But if you thought about it reasonably, there's a lot of comps where Echo was like almost useful, right? A lot of stuff like Twitch was okay, right? Twitch was pretty conditional, and then they gave him this huge mana buff. Now Twitch is very common. I'm sure you've seen Twitch in your lobbies almost every single game almost. It's because Twitch became from a unit that was already kind of okay to getting a small buff and now becoming really strong. And that's what basically happened with Zeri, right? This existed before, right? If you go in the previous patches, the average placement of this comp isn't that much better. It's not like it's broken. It's not like, holy crap, they have to nerf it. It's so bad. It's like, it's the same as before. It's just a lot more people are playing it because now people have the faith to play it. A lot of it also comes from the buff for Zeri making it a little bit more consistent. Before, you had to have a better spot to play it, obviously. Like, you couldn't just play it from anywhere. Now, a lot of times you can play it from pretty much anywhere just because you have the buffs to the whole traits. But that's basically the idea of the comp. I wanted to make a little bit of a guide similar to the other how-to guide, but I want to do it a little bit differently. Show some supplementary, like, why is this... like, you know, maybe some of the questions you might have of like why Zeri all of a sudden is really good. If you like this style, please make sure to let me know. If you like the other style with the PowerPoint, that won't go away. Trust me. It's just I didn't want to make a Firelight PowerPoint slide today. I said it'd probably be more fun if I did it this way and I explained myself. But thank you for watching. A little bit of a shorter video, but hopefully it's fun. and hopefully you can try out Zeri in your games. I was always a Zeri believer, and obviously they buffed her, so she's much better this patch. So your spots are going to need to be less high roll in order to play around Zeri. And if you see anger issues, always take anger issues if you're playing Zeri. It's probably going to get removed next patch or something. It does not seem sustainable. That's the only part that's really busted. I will tell you guys that. But thank you for watching. Have a great day, and see ya. Bye-bye.